What's up, fight fans? This is Kirk DeVille with Counterpunch Boxing News, and I have some new news concerning the infamous, the relentless LDBC. Get this, the LDBC now states or claims that Terence Crawford is being called a slave on the side of Top Rank. Okay, and old Accuse is at it again, making videos that Top Rank is claiming that that's the case with Terence Crawford. And I want to read something to you, okay? And it was a fan by the name of Born Again. Born Again reached out to Bruce Tampler, and he sent him this message, and it states this, quote, let's not act like Bud Crawford has been of that Top Rank slave ship for years. It's been, what, 2 months? He said himself Bob couldn't secure the big fights, blaming Spence. Don't make sense. So Bruce Tampler, okay, replied back to him. He said, ignorant post you made here. The so-called TR slave ship, Top Rank, paid Bud tens of millions of dollars for his fights. But you're a critic because Spence didn't want to fight Crawford. Bud is a multi-millionaire, quote-unquote, slave. You should be so fortunate. Let me counterpunch. First of all, it's Born Again used the slave terminology. He brought that up. He brought that to this conversation, right? Bruce Tampler replied back. Now, first off, the shit gets real redundant when us as a people refer to like slave ships, slave masters, bullshit that happened like over 150 years ago. It's like you can't find shit else to talk about, you know, because the more you talk about a particular thing, the more you give it energy and power. And I'll be damned, that's what people are doing, you know, but that's also a mental state. If you're in that mindset and if you think everyone is, oh, that company's, they run theirs like a slave, like a plantation, you have never really got out of that mindset. You will always be stuck in that shit until you die. And hopefully the next generation, you didn't teach them that bullshit, just like other people teach racism. Okay, so hopefully that's not something that is passed down to the other generation, and they'll be thinking that same dumb bullshit. How do you think that we got to this situation that we are now, calling everything slave ships and slave masters and plantations and all that bullshit? You know what I mean? It's like you have Born Again bringing that up, okay? Has been on a Top Rank slave ship. Like, he called him a slave. Born Again actually called him a slave. Bruce Tampler, or should I say Trampler, was replying to that comment. You know, so-called slave ship you're talking about paid Bud tens of millions of dollars. Now, let me counterpunch first of all. If Bud was such a fucking slave, why would Bob Arum be complaining about how much money he had to give him based on the contract? If anybody was a slave, it's Top Rank, because Top Rank was contractually agreed upon to pay this man. Okay, he had, or they had to pay Terence Crawford regardless of how the numbers were. Do you think a promotional company, if they didn't have to do that, they would have? Look at all the fights Bob Arum could have been involved in where he decided not to because he didn't want to pay the money. Okay, so we all know Bob Arum's cheap. So you think a guy as cheap as Bob Arum would willingly pay Terence Crawford that amount of money and then complain about it? Hades, no. Okay, that's what I'm talking about. So Born Again brought that up. Now, where does the LDBC come in? The LDBC comes in with accusing Bruce Trampler of saying, well, hey, he's a slave. Twisting the words. That is not what he said. If you read it, ignorant post you made here. The so-called TR Slaveship paid Bud tens of millions of dollars for fights, but you're a critic because Spence didn't want to fight Crawford. Bud is a multi-millionaire slave. You should be so fortunate. Meaning, if he's a fucking slave, that means he's still getting money that you never had, and slaves don't get paid. But the LDBC, you got Accuse trying to twist the narrative, and he's not even black. So why are you jumping on that? You know, you should be talking about Islam, right? That's what you need to be talking about. And that type of thing. Like I talk about Cuban fighters that don't get a fair shake. That's appropriate because that concerns me. Talk about what concerns you. Oh, well, he's going racist. No, he's not. You're just trying to feed into it because racism sells. Because people hear that, yeah, that's right. Because if they don't really read it for themselves, they're not going to know. Trampler wasn't saying that. You should be so fortunate because we gave Bud. We had to pay Bud. They didn't give him shit. They had to pay him. So let me correct that. They had to pay Bud based on his contract. Do you think Bud Crawford was pissed off about anything? He got paid more than any of those other guys at the PBC. Those are the real slaves. Why? Because they're controlled. They can't do what they want to do. They can't say what they want to say. They can't make their own fights. Okay? They're controlled. They're puppets on a string. They're not even allowed. Look at Gary Russell Jr. The moment he started talking shit, he stopped fighting. Look at Gervonta Tank Davis. The moment he started talking shit about Floyd and those guys, he couldn't fight. He fought one time that year. They put his ass on punishment. Okay, that's what you do to slaves. That's what you do to them. You put them on punishment. Right? So when have Terence Crawford ever been put on punishment? When have you never ever seen him not fight, regardless of what type of money they didn't want to pay him? We gotta pay him so much money. He's not producing anything. So what? You still gotta pay him because you signed a contract for one of the best fighters in the world, and just because it's not panning out financially the way you want to, you're pissed off. So that's Bob Arum's problem. But this was actually the mindset of Born Again that was tweeting or replying or sending a message to Bruce Trampler. But anyway, you guys tell me what you think about the LDBC twisting this around, calling or saying that Top Rank is calling Bud Crawford a slave. Of course, please subscribe, and you guys been Counterpunch. Peace.